y'all, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan, and here we do all things spooky, but specifically this month, I am doing nothing but reading stories that you guys have sent in to me. And boy, have they been scary. Just to put it lightly, you guys terrify me. You guys scare me so bad. If you have any stories you would like to send in for me to read, please check out the description below because you will find all of that information on top of all of my socials, and our first podcast episode will be linked there as well. So please check all that out, and without further ado, let's get into these stories. I love your channel, and I've been an avid watcher for like a year. I've watched every one of your scary story readings and TikTok compilations. That is dedication. There is a lot of those. Thank you for that. For a little context, from 2015 to 19, I lived in military housing in South Carolina. When we moved in, I was 7, dealing with a lot of trauma, so I was very vulnerable to otherworldly things. Our house was surrounded by forest, and every street was separated by a section of forest. I'd always been in touch with the other side and being able to sense and see things that most can't. Here are the stories. At the time of this story, I had a friend from 2nd grade class named Jace. Me and him would bug each other all the time. We hung out every day at lunch and recess, so I saw him a lot. One night, after struggling to fall asleep, and I finally did, I fell asleep and my dream started with me walking down to the bottom of the stairs and looking back up. When I looked back up, I would see Jace at the top poking his head past the wall. Once I see that, I freeze, not being able to move. Now the nightmare turns weird. It turns weird colors and he starts glitching down the stairs, slowly making his way to me. Right before he can reach me, I jolt awake. My siblings and I used to make blanket forts a lot with our dining room chairs and stuff. One day we're making one and both my siblings had walked away while I was finishing the fort. The main blanket fell down, so now I was looking down between the chairs and I saw my sister pop her head out. Except it wasn't my sister. Her smile was just too big and her eyes were dead. I started crying and yelling for my mom as I ran. There was a park nearby that someone had written all over it with blood. Yes, real blood, and they had to paint over it. Hold on, I need more backstory for that. We had a huge back window that the blinds for it were broken. Every time I passed by it at night, I felt like I was being watched. I would never play in that room once it started getting dark. Multiple times we woke up with the door open. Some were robberies. Oh God. Every time the door was left open, the activity ramped up. I saw shadow figures poking their heads around the corner of my room. They were very tall and the vibe was not good. I'm now almost 17 and across the country in Utah. The way I can see things has changed now, and I see the images in my head as it's happening. I have a tall shadow man who crawls around my basement on all fours and watches me do laundry. Anyways, love you. Bye. Oh, I hear my coffee. Okay, next story. This one makes me really anxious to tell because it brings in fight or flight responses and things kick up. If it helps, this takes place in Spokane, Washington. I think I said that right. I don't mind if you share the city and state. Maybe other listeners have had something similar in my hometown happen. This is one of the many stories I have that still stuck with me through the years. I have some ideas as to what exactly this was and would love some kind of insight as to what it could be, but at the time I had no idea. My aunt was the person who taught me what I know about the things that I see. I've always seen shadow people and things that no one else could see, and have learned that if they know I can see them, they show themselves more frequently. So I follow the if you think you saw something, no you didn't rule. That seems to be common more places. But it was something I learned because my aunt taught me that rule. On to the story. One of many. I have and would love to share eventually all of these stories. Yes. I was spending the weekend with my aunt, and she lived alone in a 1-bedroom small house, and I do mean small. We had theories it was an old shack or a stable converted into a home. Coffee. Thank you so much. Of course. You could be literally anywhere in that house and still hear the other person in the home. She had lived in a motorhome before getting this house, so it was an upgrade. I need you to understand just how small this house was so you can fully understand how terrifying this was. My aunt and I decided to watch Legend, the classic fantasy film with Tim Curry as Lord Darkness, and make rice pudding. I've always wanted to try rice pudding. Is it good? I'd gone to take a shower while she was on the couch, the only wall between us and the bathroom being an ensuite to her bedroom. I didn't fully close the bathroom door, only cracking it a little to keep the steam in the bathroom. I was enjoying the shower when I felt something slam into the bottom of the bathtub. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped and looked down as my heart was in my throat, and I yelled for my aunt who didn't come. The banging traveled up the wall. The wall had a window that looked out to the alleyway, but it was not see-through. The wall was slammed another 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. I didn't even bother to turn the water off. I just grabbed a towel and ran into the living room to tell my aunt something was outside, and gave her dog the guard and attack command as she ran outside to confront whoever was banging on the wall, because they were now watching an underage girl shower. Only there was no one around. We recalled the dog and went back inside, making sure that all the doors and windows were locked. Once we made sure everything was locked up tight and safe, she asked me to walk her through everything. When I mentioned that there was banging on the bottom of the tub and on the sides of the house, she looked confused. I didn't hear any banging. Well, I mentioned I called out for her and she looked worried. I didn't hear you either. We spent the rest of the night trying to not think about what happened and the fact that we had no idea who or what it was. Eventually we fall asleep and I woke up to the smell of coffee, bacon, and pancakes. I looked at my aunt and saw that she was still sound asleep. It was just the two of us, so who was cooking? I get up off the couch and took 4 steps down the hall to look into the small kitchen. It was the smallest kitchen I had ever seen in my entire life. Like whoever built this house forgot to add it and went oops and just shoved it in there. Only one person could fit in that kitchen comfortably. There was no one in the kitchen and nothing was being cooked. I shrugged it off as maybe a smell from a neighbor, and I brushed it off and took the dog outside to go potty. I was expecting to smell the food outside, but I didn't. I just smelled wet grass from it being early in the morning. This was just something that happened in that house. We always smelled food cooking, and we were never the ones cooking. Food would disappear, and we would check everywhere. We determined it wasn't a Frogger. We have no idea who or what any of this activity was around her. I have so many stories, especially with what I experienced with my aunt and what she had told me about. I'm happy to share those if you're interested, and I also have stories about a guardian I have and have had for many years. They come to me in my dreams, and those are always terrifying. That reminds me of something that happened to my mom growing up that she told me about. She said she woke up one morning to the smell of bacon being cooked, and she had walked down the hallway. She thought she would see her mom in the kitchen, but it was literally just this figure in like a cloak covering its face, and it like raised its arm and pointed for her to go back to her room. And she turned around and went back, and when she actually got up that morning, her mom was making like waffles, and that never happened. And that's what that made me think of. Yes, please send in those stories. All right, next story. Hi, Morgan. I'm also Morgan. Hi, Morgan. It's giving. Hi, Barbie. I love your stories and watch them every day when I eat, need to sleep, or just want a little downtime. I won't go on about it, but I just wanted to let you know how impactful and loved your content and you are. I always tear up at that stuff. Okay, anyways. First story. I think it's important that you know that I'm a pagan witch and that my boyfriend is agnostic, but still will read tarot or talk about our household hauntings. He's not super in touch, but enjoys listening to me, or so he says. One night we were sleeping in our bed and I woke up thinking he was on my right side when I realized he was on my left, where he was when we fell asleep. It must have been between 1 and 3 in the morning. Next to me, I see a black shadow figure laying in the bed. There's not a lot of space between me and the wall, so I freak out. I woke up my boyfriend because I just knew that if he reached his arm over, it would disappear. But if I touched it, I wouldn't feel a person there. Let me just say, I was wide awake. There is no way this could have been a dream. I got up after he reached his hand over and went to use the bathroom. I was shaking and crying, and I've never felt so intensely about things like that. The vibrations of that entity must have been so low because I usually do a little cleansing and be totally good again. The second story. When I was in college, I lived in Savannah, Georgia. It's considered to be the top 3 most haunted cities in the country. I had plenty of small things happen to me, but nothing crazy up until this time. I was living alone in the studio apartment, and I'd recently adopted my cat from a shelter. She was super shy at first, but then she came from an abusive home. But I was working with her to help her get acclimated to my space and being loved and taken care of. Oh, you said you went to college in Savannah. Did you go to, what's it called? Is it SCAD? I remember my cousin wanting to go there so bad. Their campus is gorgeous. Over the course of a couple days, I had taken a few naps. The first one I woke up to being spat on, but I was alone and my cat was under the bed in her hiding space. The second time, I felt that I got hit in the back, but again, no one was there. The third time, I had a dream that my friend said, if you see crows, we need to leave. And then all of a sudden, a huge group of them landed on a tree in front of me. A night or two later, I was winding down to go to bed when I heard my Luna moth in her frame fly from one wall and hit the next and fall. It broke her body, just not good vibes. The walls are probably 5 feet apart or less. It was narrow in between my bathroom and living space. I did a cleansing immediately, which thankfully worked, but that was an odd one. I was told that if it was going to mess with my cat and scare her, it can walk right out of the door before I need to force it out. That's the stories I have for today, but I have so many more if you're interested. Sorry for rambling and tangents. I haven't written in a while. No, that was great. Yes, please send the rest of your stories, especially if they're from Savannah, because I'm obsessed with Savannah. I haven't been in years, but that's probably my favorite city that I've ever visited. It's stunning. The cobblestone streets, the old buildings, the aura, the vibes. All right, next story. To start this off, I'm a psychic and a witch, and every place I've lived in growing up was haunted. I've got plenty of stories, so I thought it was my time to share them with you. There's a lot of context and build up to this one, so please bear with me. This is also my scariest one, and I do think it would be a good idea for you and anyone watching to cleanse your space before and after reading this, because this spirit has been known to love attention and try to show up when talked about. You guys heard that. Cleanse your space, lock your screens. I haven't seen her since this incident, but I felt her presence when talking about her in later life. I do think she hasn't shown back up because I'm diligent about cleansing these days. Anyways, this story takes place when I was a freshman in high school and still lived with my conservative parents. I hadn't found my calling in witchcraft yet. I always knew I was sensitive to spirits, and they always pestered me. We had just left my childhood home where I had plenty of weird and creepy experiences before, but none compared to the horrors I experienced at this apartment complex, which we had moved into after. For context, as a child and even a high schooler, I was not a napper. I hated naps. I still do to this day because it throws off my entire sleep schedule and makes me feel icky. But as soon as we moved into this place, I suddenly felt the need to nap every single day. And it wasn't just your typical exhausted teen who just entered high school naps. No, I wasn't depressed at the time, and if anything, I was known to stay up late so that I could talk to my online friends and work on my art. I stopped doing all of that as soon as we moved into this place. I would get home, eat a snack, go straight to bed, where I would stay until the next morning. On days where I wouldn't try to get up for a while in the afternoon or evenings, I would get horrifically ill somehow, and I would end up having to go back to bed. I remember one day my mom came into my room to wake me up to try and get me up to eat dinner. My head was throbbing and I could barely see straight, but I tried to eat nonetheless. I ended up throwing up everything almost immediately, and you guessed it, went back to sleep. The days dragged on like this for a very long time. It started with me waking up at random times to see the door to my closet open and the light in the closet turned on. I shared this room with my little brother, and at the time asked him if he had been fiddling with the door that night, and he said no. I asked my mom if she'd come into our room at night, and doing so, she said no. Until one night I wake up and I'm in that half-in, half-out state of sleep. I see the closet doorknob slowly turn itself and begin to creak open. Then the light pops on by itself. I swore I saw an all-white translucent hand on the door, but after noticing it, my head felt heavy and I snapped back asleep. I wanted to get up and run out of my room and tell someone, but I felt as though I wasn't in control of my body and lost consciousness despite trying to fight it. This went on for a while, with the same things happening maybe a few times a week, along with some other typical paranormal experiences. One of which was one of my mom's favorite Coca-Cola brand cups, which was very heavy, sturdy glass, moving itself across the counter a few times before then being thrown to the ground and shattering. We all saw it happen and were stunned. I dropped the thing many times washing dishes, and it had never broke before. From this day, it escalated. Sometime later, my little brother was in our closet digging through his toy box. I'd actually been awake on this day, shockingly, and was helping my mom clean. We both heard this weird sound of shifting wood and metal. My little brother screamed. When we ran in there, the wooden shelves and metal racks in the upper part of the closet had come loose and were falling. My mom got underneath them and held them up just in time. It was a very small apartment and took seconds to get to him. A second later, though, my brother, who was only 6 at the time, would have been crushed and possibly lost his life. I looked into the closet and saw 2 ghostly white hands like I'd seen before yanking on the shelves. My brother revealed in later years to me that he also saw this creature face smirking at him before the shelves came down. After this day, this thing grew a huge pair of gonads and decided since it could get away with those 2 events, it was going to take it further, and decided it was time to reveal itself to me. It was 5 in the morning and I was getting ready for school. No one else was awake and Dad was off to work. Mom was asleep on the couch. Little bro was asleep in his other room. My mom was directly in front of my dad's room, and I was getting dressed with my door open since no one else was around. I felt something was amiss that morning. As soon as I got up, I felt this thing lurking around, felt the familiar feeling of being watched. All my life, for one reason or another, spirits loved to congregate in my parents' room, everywhere we lived. Something felt off in his room that morning. I couldn't stop staring into it. The door was lightweight, intended to slowly shift its way as if my dad didn't keep one of his heavy steel work boots in front of it. So that's what he did, and I could clearly see his bed was made. It was obvious that he had already left for work, but kept a spare boot against that door to keep it open. I took my eyes off of his room for a second to pull on my pants and heard a shuffling sound. I looked back up and his boot had been moved. I jokingly thought to myself, watch, I'm going to go down to button my pants and this door is going to be closed. And that's exactly what happened. So I jokingly thought to myself, watch, I'm going to come back up after putting my shirt on and that door will be open again. And then that's what happened. And then I came face to face with this thing that had been tormenting us. I saw the ghostly white hand appear again, its fingers wrapped around the edge of the door, slowly pulling it open. I was frozen on the spot and couldn't look away, and I felt that familiar feeling of not being in control of my body. Then from behind the door peeked his face, a ghostly all-white form of a woman. Even her eyes were entirely blank and white. Her hair was done up very nicely, put up in an old French style adorned with jewels, which were also white. The only color on her, her lips, which were a vibrant ruby red, and wet-looking, almost as if she'd painted them in blood. She smiled at me, or smirked, I should say, because it was wicked and ill-intended, and very smug. From her smile, large vampire fangs protruded, all the way to her chin. The ruby red color of her lips began to drip down her chin, and you'd think she had been drinking blood. She suddenly and violently flung the entire door open and revealed herself. She was dressed just like Marie Antoinette would be. She was just as beautiful as she was horrifying. I was stunned and still paralyzed, just stood there gazing at her. I have a very strong intuition for picking up vibes and intentions, and I felt in that moment as she revealed herself to me fully that she was boasting. She wanted me to know that she was the one responsible for all the mishaps in the apartment, especially for my lack of energy. She was boasting about feeding off of me and boasting about almost eliminating my brother. The blood dripping from her lips felt like a threat. She wanted me to feel that intent and wanted me to be afraid. I was just a teen who had no idea how to protect myself back then, and the Bible and prayer did not work for me. So of course I was afraid, and I felt a little hopeless too. But eventually I did snap out of that trance, and I sarcastically thought to myself again, watch, I'm gonna look down and look back, and my dad's door will be in the same position it was earlier, boot up against it and all, as if none of this ever happened. And that's exactly what happened. She was gone, door was back in its place. I felt her presence vanish, and I struggled with oversleeping and nightmares and paranormal activities afterwards like I did before. But I never saw her again, thankfully, and we moved out soon after. Back then, I didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone about this because I learned very quickly that I'd never be believed. I just brushed it off or was told to pray. It wasn't until I was older that I had the balls to ask my little brother if he ever saw her, and he revealed to me that he did see her awful smirk that day when she brought the closet down on him, and many other times after that, he did see her roaming the house. I also found out that even our dad and one of our sisters saw her as well. My dad described her exactly as I did without me even telling him my story. He said he felt there was an evil in that bedroom of his and he never felt safe in there, along with also constantly having nightmares and never feeling rested no matter how much he slept, much like I did. After we left, I went back to being a normal teen who enjoyed staying up late, browsing the web, talking to my online friends. I went back to my love of art and music. Any sleep issues I had were from fear that spirits would come and hurt me in the night, but as I got a bit of PTSD from that horrid vampire lady, my sleep habits were fairly normal again. Maybe this doesn't sound as horrifying to some people, but can you imagine being a 14-year-old child knowing that you're being fed on by an evil spirit who is proud of themselves for doing so and being so helpless to it? Nowadays, I keep my house on spiritual lockdown. Things barely ever get in, and if they do, they will know immediately that I mean business. I'm so grateful now to be engaged to a druid who helps me keep the house clean of negative entities and to have come into my own power. I never feel helpless in the situations ever again. Of all the places I've lived and spirits I've encountered, that place and the Marie Antoinette vampire lady were the worst by far. So once again, if anyone reading or hearing this now feels a presence watching them, please go cleanse your space immediately. She will come through and she will suck the life out of you, very literally. I feel like I just cursed people watching this. They also sent a bonus story from this same apartment complex, but this one is the scariest thing that happened to my little brother while we lived there. He shared this with me years later while discussing the vampire lady. You'd think his scariest thing would be almost getting crushed in the closet by that thing, but no, it actually was worse. I'll tell you guys my experience I had with this place first and lead into his, because knowing what I knew about this place before this happened to him makes it much more creepy. So let's get into it. We lived in one of those states that is in Tornado Valley. It just so happened that we were experiencing a really bad tornado this day. My parents were frantic trying to safely collect my siblings from school and from their jobs. The truck got picked up in the wind a few times from what I hear. It was not a wholesome situation. I personally was already home that day because of me frequently falling ill while living in that place. I often missed school. The apartment complex had instructed us to all go into the basement area underneath the apartments for our safety. It apparently had been its own apartment at one point, and now it's just gutted and condemned. But it being below ground was the safest place for us to be, and that's where we gathered. I remember getting this awful gut feeling as we neared the doors and not wanting to go in there. Nevertheless, my mom and my eldest brother ushered us all inside as the winds picked up crazy outside. We kept the doors cracked while we waited for my dad to get back home with our sisters and little brother. There were 2 tornadoes at this point, and I could see them spinning outside, but something in me was telling me to run out there and not be inside that building. The doors were concrete, the walls were all stone with paint scraps and weird stains all over them, and an old rusted metal rack hanging by garden tools. The only light we had was the crack in the door as we held it open, watching for any family or neighbors. I clung to the doors, desperately wanting to be as close to the outside as possible. Mom kept pushing me back and fussing at me because it was unsafe. Eventually, she told me if I got too close to the door again, I was going to be in big trouble, so I stepped back and stayed as close to them as I could. There was one corner in the back of the building that was somehow darker than the rest. I already couldn't see anything hardly without the light of the outside reaching, but this corner was shrouded in an unnatural darkness that sent all of my alarm bells into overdrive. The pit in my stomach, goosebumps down my extremities, sweating, the whole 9 yards. I couldn't bear to stare at that corner for any amount of time. But curiosity still got the better of me, and I tried to soothe my anxiety by approaching the space to convince myself that nothing was wrong with it. I saw in that corner that there was a few leftover walls of what used to be a room. A small bathroom, I'm guessing, because I also saw an old rusty tub with some rusty tools sitting inside of it. And there was an inky, thick, dark liquid coming from the bottom of the tub. It was also splattered on the walls and floor. It crossed my mind that it could be blood, and I felt as if there was a large presence looming in that very back corner watching. It was so black in that area that I was surprised to have seen anything at all, but I had seen enough. So when I swear that I saw 2 circular white eyes glowing from the very black corner of that makeshift bathroom, and heard a heavy, raspy breath, I was out. I was done. My instinct alarm bells went off in full force, and I sprinted back up to the opening of those doors, to which my mom scolded me again. When my dad and siblings arrived in the nick of time as the tornadoes had begun to ravage our neighborhood, they all got inside with our neighbors and held the door tightly closed. I could have cried as it went pitch black in that place and stayed very close to Mom. She thought I was upset about the tornadoes and promised to keep us safe. The adults struggled to hold the doors closed as the tornado came through and winds rattled the doors incessantly. It sounds crazy, but I was just happy that there was a little glimpse of light outside as the doors rattled. You know, whatever was in there was bad when a 14-year-old girl would rather run outside and take her chances with 2 tornadoes. I didn't notice back then because we weren't as close as we are today, but my little brother was just as scared of that basement as I was. I think he sensed the same thing, being 14 and being forced to share a room with my 6 to 7-year-old brother. I think I mostly saw him as a nuisance back then, as most teens would, so I never asked. But years later, when I came into my adult years and he became 14 himself, we reconciled. Now, since then, I've apologized for being a snobby butthole of a big sister. We became close and he started staying with me every weekend and holiday. We would stay up late playing video games and talking about these spooky things that happened to us as kids, and that's when he told me about his experience in that basement. It wasn't long after the tornado. My dad had left some things down there that he needed to retrieve. A cooler for water and food, a tarp, and some flashlights. Little bro is the type to follow dad everywhere he went. He remembers feeling creeped out by that place too, but had even more morbid curiosity than I. Feeling safe with dad there, he began to look around, and he recalls that corner where the ruins of the bathroom were, and how it just felt as I said, something darker than everywhere else in that place. Armed with a flashlight, he approached the bathroom and found a pull chain on the ceiling to a light bulb. So he pulled it and it blinked on, giving off a dim and eerie yellow light. He saw the old tub and rusty old tools and dark, thick liquid, which was definitely blood. He also recalls seeing rusty, bloody kitchen knives, torn up clothes scattered about, and bones on the floor. Then he heard the same raspy, heavy breathlessness that I did, coming from behind him. So he spins around and saw this horrible creature, 7 to maybe 8 feet tall, hunched over. Its body and face looked to be made of burnt and tattered flesh. Its face was fixed in a permanent smile like a jack-o'-lantern, with rows of razor-sharp teeth and strips of mangled flesh dangling over them for lips. Its eyes were round and beady, all white and glowing with an unnatural light. Its arms were normalish until its elbows, and they were burnt, mangled flesh formed 2 long sights. He said it just stood there breathing and watching. He ran off, not wanting to know what happened next, but later he told me he felt that thing didn't want to hurt him. He said his intuition told him that it didn't want to be made the way it was, and it didn't want to hurt people, but someone was controlling it and forcing it to. He said he felt sorry for this beast, and I believed him and felt a bit sorry too. I still want that thing to stay far, far away from us, but thankfully we haven't seen it since. If you made it this far, Morgan, you're awesome. I got mad respect for you and what you do, and I'll be hella excited if this makes it to your channel so we can scare your viewers together. I know these stories were long and rambly, so thank you for taking the time to read and listen. Hope you have fun reading these, and once again, please be safe out there. Okay. Yeah. That makes me so sad. I kind of got the vibes too that it wasn't like trying to hurt anyone. But the vampire lady, I will be cleansing after this for sure. Pete, are you having fun shaking the tripod? Have you just been doing that the whole time? Anyways, that is all for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I have cat hair on my lip and it is just so bad. I will see you next time.